The elected leader of a country just snatched from his bed in the middle of the night by a foreign military. Sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster, right? Well, the source material we're looking at today lays out a really detailed, kind of terrifying hypothetical scenario for how something just like that could actually go down.
And this isn't some story from the history books. We're talking about a date that's just around the corner, January 3rd, 2026.
And the sitting for all this? Caracas, Venezuela. And you got to remember, this is a country sitting on the single largest oil reserves in the entire world.
The time, 2:01 a.m. We're talking the dead of night, with the whole city plunged into darkness by a blackout. That's when the operation kicks off.
And get this quote from our source just sets this incredibly surreal scene. Thousands of miles away, in a dark room in Florida, the U.S. president is supposedly watching this whole thing unfold on a live feed, just like it was a TV show. It's a wild image.
Okay, so let's break this down. What exactly was Operation Absolute Resolve? According to the source, the whole thing unfolded in a pretty stunning sequence of events. You know, this wasn't some last-minute, spur-of-the-moment decision, not at all. The source material claims this took months of super careful planning. We're talking about the CIA tracking President Maduro's every move, and Delta Force commandos practicing the raid over and over on an exact replica of his house. They were just waiting for a clear weather window to get that final go order.
And the sheer scale of the force they supposedly brought to bear is, well, it's just overwhelming. We're talking more than 150 aircraft from 20 different bases, a cyber attack that knocks out power to the entire city, airstrikes to take out radar and defenses, and then the source says that within just 5 minutes of commandos hitting the building, the president was captured. It was fast, it was brutal, and it left 40 people dead.
So the huge question here is, why? I mean, how could the United States possibly justify something like this? Kidnapping the leader of another country? Well, according to the source, the official story they gave was very, very focused on one thing.
Right? So the official line wasn't invasion or act of war. No. The source says the administration framed it as a simple act of law enforcement, an arrest. After all, President Maduro was an indicted drug trafficker, and the charge sheet included things like narco-terrorism and plotting to flood the U.S. with cocaine.
Okay, but here's the thing. A huge accusation like that, it needs some pretty solid evidence to back it up, right? And this is where it gets interesting. Because according to the source, when you actually dig into the numbers, that whole official story, it starts to look a little shaky. Yeah, take a look at this comparison. It really highlights the problem. The source points out that Venezuela isn't even a major player. It's mostly a transit country for cocaine headed to Europe. But then you look at a country like Guatemala, which ships almost 6 times more cocaine, most of it straight to the U.S., and yet no military raid there. It really makes you wonder about that official motive, doesn't it? All right, so if the drug argument seems pretty thin, what's the real story? Well, the source we're looking at argues the motive was something way, way more valuable. Something that's been a source of conflict for 100 years. Oil.
303 billion barrels. Just let that number sink in for a minute. That is the amount of proven crude oil reserves sitting under Venezuela. It is, without a doubt, the largest single reserve on the entire planet.
So to put that into perspective for you, that's more oil than Saudi Arabia has. It's more than Iran has. Venezuela is sitting on nearly a fifth of the entire world's supply. It's a prize that is just, it's almost impossible to overstate its strategic and economic importance. And look, this fight over oil is nothing new. The source traces this tension back a full century. For decades, U.S. companies basically ran the show in Venezuelan oil. But then the country nationalized its industry. Later, President Hugo Chavez really doubled down on state control, essentially kicking foreign companies out. The U.S. response? Sanctions. And that kicked off years and years of intense economic pressure. And then we get this quote, which for the source is the absolute smoking gun. Reportedly spoken the day after the raid, it just completely changes the story. The idea that Venezuela was controlling its own natural resources,
Well, that was described as them taking oil away from us. It seems to reveal what the source argues was the real motivation all along, getting that oil back under foreign influence.
Okay, so whatever the motive was, whether it was drugs or oil, you have to ask, was this even legal? And according to the source, the answer is a hard no. It broke laws both inside the U.S. and on the international stage. So first, let's just look at U.S. law. The Constitution is super clear on this. Only Congress has the power to declare war. The source claims that by launching a full-blown military op like this, without even talking to Congress, let alone getting their approval, the president completely sidestepped a fundamental check on presidential power.
And then you've got the global rules. The United Nations Charter, this is the rule book for how countries are supposed to interact. It explicitly says you can't just use military force against another country's independence. So an operation like this, it's presented as a total flagrant violation of that basic principle.
And this all leads to the final and maybe the most important point. When a superpower just decides to ignore these kinds of laws, what does that mean for everybody else? The source paints a picture of some pretty immediate and pretty severe global fallout.
The backlash was apparently swift and it was global. You had major countries in Latin America and Europe all coming together to condemn it, calling it a dangerous precedent. The head of the UN called it a clear violation of the Charter, and other big powers like China and Russia, they didn't mince words either. A phrase that kept popping up over and over was New Age colonialism.
And really, this is the ultimate takeaway from the source material. An act like this, it's not just about one country. It's about tearing a hole in the whole idea of a rules-based international order. It basically sends a message that if you're powerful enough, the rules just don't apply to you.
So the whole scenario leaves us with this really chilling question. If the powerful nations who make the rules are also allowed to break them whenever they want, what does that mean for the rest of us? It kind of suggests a new world order where might makes right. And you have to wonder, what does that do to any hope for global stability?